Welcome back to Reimagine 2020. I'm Yonah Hochhauser, and today I'm glad to be joined by Humayun Sheikh, CEO and co-founder at Fetch.ai. Humayun, thank you so much for joining us.
It's always a pleasure, Yonah. It's good to be here.
Now, first off, tell our audience who might not be familiar with you or your work, kind of who you are and how you got into blockchain.
Sure. So my background is in computer science. I've been involved in telecoms, machine learning, AI, and I had really was lucky enough to know a couple of right people in the machine learning AI space, in the blockchain space, and 20 years in Cambridge in the UK, worked around different technologies and got connected with some really good people. Did some work for did some work with Demis, who was a founder of DeepMind. We sold that to Google. I was part of that as an investor, as a commercialization person who was looking at commercializing machine learning and AI. And so we started Fetch.ai 2.5, 3 years ago, where the co-founders, the three co-founders, myself, my other co-founder Toby, who also used to work for DeepMind, software development head, and I've got Thomas Hain, who was a professor in machine learning and AI in the university. We got together and we started looking at doing some multi-agent systems. So where people who are different stakeholders in a system could come together, interact, where the incentives could be aligned, economic incentives, technical incentives. And we then came across the technology which we thought was the right technology for multi-agent system, which is blockchain. Because if you look at what blockchain is, it is actually a really good example of multi-agent system, because you have all these different participants. They all want to either cheat, they need to have the incentive aligned. You can apply the game theory all day long, and you can see that the blockchain itself kind of manages it with the right incentive structure. So that's what kind of pulled us into blockchain.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I speak to a lot of projects, for these conferences, and it seems like most of the people I'm speaking to that are working with the blockchain are utilizing it for finance,
Yes.
Platforms, for financial trading, and all sorts of these financial tools. So it's really interesting to be speaking to someone who's founder. Another great use case, like you said, using that same game theory, but for another means, kind of for this decentralized machine learning platform based on a decentralized or distributed ledger. And for someone who's not a computer scientist, who's just a regular layman, when I hear buzzwords like machine learning and blockchain, they sound so futuristic, so cutting edge. But you mentioned there that my question would be, what is the connection here? And for here you're making it seem like blockchain is kind of this framework that allows you to do this learning, to do this research. Joined by Evan Crow, co-founder with other actors outside of your company.
Thanks, Yonah. I'm glad to be here. And I see you're wearing a costume for this Halloween-themed interview.
So
yes, sirree. I know it's not a very scary costume, but this is what I had around the house, so you'll have to forgive me.
Right, it might be scary if you stand up.
Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna sit.
Yeah.
The camera tilted upwards.
So if you think
so Evan, so for those who haven't seen any of your past interviews, who might
which is sitting there, smart infrastructure which is sitting there, and you think about all the people who have to interact, it's a very good example of a multi-agent system. So you have these cars, every car is owned by somebody else, they have their own motive, they're going somewhere else. Some people are in a rush, some people are taking it easy, some people need to arrive at a particular place because it might have some economic benefit or advantage or disadvantage. And you have then a city who's trying to control this traffic so that you don't have congestion because everybody wants to go in a particular area. So now you have all these different stakeholders who want to come together to solve the problem. Let's say we all want to solve the traffic problem, probably not the parking people, because they might want more parking. spaces so they can fund it right. But then all of these people have one common incentive, which is, they want the traffic to run smoothly, right? But they have other incentives to do things, which, somebody might cut somebody out so that they can go beyond and then get into parking space before somebody else. So all these things, these are, let's consider them as agents. Now think of a car as an agent, any sensors in the car, the traffic light as an agent. What needs to happen is all these things somehow need to connect with each other, communicate with each other, and have a method of exchanging information and value. Because what happens is then you create a place where people can align or disalign incentives, or they can deliver certain tasks, they can connect to each other, and actually a new type of economy starts to take shape. Now, if you look at where the problem is in traffic or anything like that, the problem is we are trying to take a monolithic system. We're saying, here's this big software. Everybody connects to that software. So who owns the software? We don't know. Is it the council? Is it Google? Is it Amazon? Who should own it? And then you're trying to get them to connect to each other, and then trying to kind of schedule all the tasks they need to do. I mean, if you're going to try and schedule their tasks from a monolithic point of view, it's a very difficult problem to solve. What we're saying is turn it on its head and give the autonomy to every single entity, make it a stakeholder, make it an agent. Now the agents, I mean, you don't get to, a lot of people get worried about AI, software agents and all of that. An agent is just it's like an agency which represents you or a task or a objective. Now you try and bring them all together. Where would you bring them all together where you can actually have the trust that they will carry out the tasks, they will record the tasks in the right way so anybody can have a look at it. So that's how blockchain kind of comes into it, whereby it's a immutable truth, and you can actually rely on it, and you can actually connect people. Now, blockchain like Bitcoin, Ethereum, they're not built for anything like this. So what we're doing is we're saying, yes, that architecture which exists for the financial reasons, although it's valuable, and it's very valuable, it's not the structure we need for running multi-agent systems. So we are building a layer on top of it, and actually building our own chain as well for interoperability, because all these stakeholders, they have also economic and financial incentives. So they need to still do the transactions. But before they do the transactions, they still need to connect.
We're joined by Evan Crow, co-founder of Ample4th. Evan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Yonah. I'm glad to be here, and I see you're wearing a costume for this Halloween-themed interview.
Yes, sir. I know it's not a very scary costume, but this is what I had around the house, so you'll have to forgive me.
Right, it might be scary if you stand up.
Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna sit.
Yeah.
The camera tilted around. If everyone's on so Evan, so for those who haven't seen any of your past interviews, everyone to Highway B, because Highway B will become a fill. So pretty much the way the system works today, and a lot of people don't realize this, but Google is actually deciding who gets sent to that quicker way and who doesn't. And like you mentioned, the incentives are totally out of whack. So let's say in this scenario, like you were saying, using your system, would people like kind of set their priorities? And I'm in a rush, I'm willing to spend, X amount of money to get that shortcut. And people who are not in a rush, they'll say, hey, my priority is saving money, and even if it's a longer route.
Yeah. So now think of kind of something in the future. Let's be a bit more adventurous and futuristic about this. So let's say you have autonomous cars. You sit in an autonomous car, and the autonomous car is going to take you somewhere, right? You can do exactly that, which is you can set your priorities, and you can say, okay, I mean, if there's a congestion and I need to get, I mean, we all are used to it. So if there is an ambulance behind you, you give way, right? Mm-hmm. The ambulance is coming, and you're going to give way. Now you could do similar things whereby people can be incentivized to do certain things and not incentivized to do certain things. I mean, a very good example is a a field trial that we're doing in Munich right now, which is looking at a building where actually it's incentivized people to not park in a parking lot. So if you don't park in a parking space, that means you're not traveling with your car, and you're actually coming to work in a public network, which means you're saving, you say kind of, you're improving the the emissions, and you're being rewarded to do that. So you could, but you can't do that unless you have the mechanism to do that. And again, you can create new models of new things. I'll give you another example. So you have let's say all these intermediaries, right? So Uber is an intermediary. Like Expedia is also an intermediary. So what they have is what they actually do. What they do is they sit in the middle, and they have multiple stakeholders around them, which is all the hoteliers or all the taxi cabs and everything, and they connect them to the consumer, right? And why do they exist is because, otherwise how would you connect the two, right? And that's the problem we've had in the past, and that's what the technology has led us to. It has led us to aggregators, right? And the same applies with Google. So you have millions of websites. How do you find them? And that's what Google enables you to do. So you have, on one side, you have a supplier, and the other side, you have a consumer. You have the two stakeholders or multiple stakeholders trying to get to each other before the other, right? So you've got 10,000 selling one product and 10,000 trying to buy it. How do you bring them together? So I think, so if you look at that, then we evolved into this monolithic kind of technology where it sits in the middle, like Google, like Amazon, like Uber. They're all the same effectively in generalization, and they connect one to the other. Now, what has changed now is that with blockchain and with this kind of agent-based framework we're developing, that is not a blocker anymore, right? So you can connect your agent to another agent or multiple agents without the need for the aggregator. And again, that's where blockchain comes in, because now what you have, so for example, what does Uber do is Uber finds you the most efficient supplier of the service, which is the cab, and connects the consumer to it. It actually enables you to prove trust that, it's a trusted party. And the third thing it does is it does the settlement. So when you pay, you're going to get paid. And it takes a cut for it in the middle. It's a valuable service. However, it's with the techniques which are coming with blockchain, with Fetch, with agent-based systems, you don't need that middle party, because you can do all those three things. So you can do search and discovery, you can do price discovery, and you can connect from one agent to the other. You can even negotiate pricing. You can deliver the service and can be monitored, and then you can settle the economic value. And that's the change.
So I'm seeing that like you mentioned, this is massive, because intermediaries and aggregators, service aggregators, are these essentially the biggest companies today. Even Amazon essentially is, putting aside the web services, but their Amazon marketplace is also aggregating tons of vendors, and Google and all these aggregation. And you could also talk about social media. We could talk about the aggregation of data soon. But essentially, this blockchain has such a tremendous opportunity to really shake that up, because there doesn't really joined by Evan Crow, co-founder of Ample, that is doing that connection. Evan, thanks so much for joining. Platform.
Thanks, Yonah. I'm glad to be here, and I see you're wearing a costume for this Halloween-themed interview.
Yes, sir. I know it's not a very scary costume, but this is what I had around the house, so you'll have to forgive me.
Right, it might be scary if you stand up.
So we go
exactly. I'm gonna sit.
Yeah.
The camera tilted upward.
From the yellow.
Right.
So Evan, so for those who haven't seen any of your past interviews, who might
asking Google something and Google saying, hey, here's the results, right? So you're already starting to do machine learning in AI, because you're asking Google to do the job, and you're asking the Google to kind of do all of the work. Now, what then happens is because they sit in the middle and they do all the work that they do, they obviously then take the data and use it for their benefit. Now, what you want to do is, if you're going to come up with a system which is going to change that model, and I'm not saying that model doesn't have its own value, it's more efficient, it's all of that. But when you're going to go to the new way of doing things, you're not going to go back to the primitive method whereby the agent doesn't have any intelligence, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to give the agents, you have to give the representative agents, you have to give them some intelligence, because you need them to do certain tasks which they can automate. So you can give your preference to the agents, and the agent has to go and search for the right things and kind of find the right things. And it has to have the learning capability to understand and to start learning from your preferences. It needs to start learning from what's happening, how to interact with these different stakeholders. So that's where the machine learning and AI comes in. So you're doing transactions. You need to understand the transactions. You need to learn from the transactions. So part of this whole architecture is a way where you can actually do collective learning, so agents can learn from each other.
Mm-hmm. And so what you guys at Fetch are doing, you're essentially trying to build this infrastructure, this sandbox for then other developers to build these solutions on, or you guys already have in your mind, when you're building this framework, the solution rails already?
Yeah, so there are two parts. And people ask me this question a lot, hey, there is this blockchain company which came around 6 months ago. They've already launched their product. Yes, we are not taking that approach, because we can't take that approach. It's a whole framework we have to build. And it's not an easy framework to build. You're trying to kind of bring a new type of way of doing things. So you're going to change that whole point. So it's got two parts. The two components are, one, you have to build a framework which enables agents to connect, to settle, to find, has the architecture for machine learning and AI. And on top of that, then you have to build all the toolkits for people to build different solutions. Now, different solutions in different segments, different verticals, will need different types of things. And so what we're doing is we now kind of come to a, let's say, a version 1 of this whole architecture. What we're now doing is we're giving example deployments. So we're saying, okay, you could deploy it in this sector. So for example, in mobility, you can do these kind of things with it. We're going to show you how to do them. We're going to give you documentation. We're going to give you toolkits. We're going to even do a sample deployment. And then from there, we want the developers, we want the entrepreneurs to come and build new business models, because suddenly you have a different way of looking at things. Suddenly you have a different technology which you can use to connect with different things. And the objective is to show, but not to build in each vertical.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the, you mentioned that this all comes down to, multiple actors or multiple agents, trying to interact with each other in a trustless environment. You're trying to build a framework where it doesn't matter, no matter how badly they want to rip each other off, because the way it's built, they can't, or their economic incentive is to be trustworthy. That's the name of the game here in blockchain. And the way that we joined by Evan Crow, co-founder, especially the financial blockchains. Evan, thanks so much for joining us. Is through consensus.
Thanks, Yonah. I'm glad to be here, and I see you're wearing a costume for this Halloween-themed interview.
Yes, sirree. I know it's not a very scary costume, but this is what I had around the house, so you'll have to forgive me.
Right, it might be scary if you stand up.
Exactly. I'm gonna sit.
Yeah.
The camera tilted upward.
Right.
So Evan, so for those who haven't seen any of your past interviews, who might,
it works, but then there are so many others also which work as well. So we are consensus agnostic, as long as we know that our agents, when they interact with different chains, are also rather than trying to worry about the one consensus, we want to worry about that when you interact with so many different chains, you have to ensure that the agents amongst themselves have a consensus mechanism which makes sure that they don't cheat each other and the incentives are aligned. So rather than relying or making a choice on one consensus or another. What we're trying to do is we're trying to build an interoperability layer which takes care of it, and we can use multiple consensus methods. So yeah, I mean, for our chain, we have a minimal agency consensus, but we're not that fussed about it. We want to be able to do multiple chains. Interoperability is the key here, because we don't know which one is going to be the best.
And when we're talking about Internet of Things, when this connected world, we're kind of every device, every single thing we have is a smart device. At least it could communicate with other devices, gadgets, homes, wallets. I mean, everything. That once the whole world becomes connected, we're talking about a massive amount of data that has to be communicated between them. And from your point of view, from the work that you've done and the research, do you think that blockchain could scale up to the necessary amount that it needs to in order to handle all this data, all this number of transactions, no matter how micro they may be, between all these devices?
Yes, I think so. I mean, perhaps not Ethereum, perhaps not perhaps not the more older type of chains, but the principle is there to scale. For example, sharding, combining sharding with DAG. I mean, this is what we have done in our consensus, in our chain. But there is quite a lot. There is quite a lot happening, and I think yes, it will scale and it would work. One thing I really wanted to point out was, moving data around is not the most efficient way of doing things, because if you're saying and this is kind of at core of Fetch. If you start moving data around, it's gonna be very inefficient, right? So what you want to do is there is some data you don't want to move around. What you need that data for is to do the learning from it, and I think what needs to happen is really you contain the data where it is, because then you are also the data protection, GDPR issues. You're looking after the data where it is, but you're training models based on that data, whereby you have differential privacy applying. You're not kind of taking privacy for granted. You're training your models, but you're not letting your data out, and that's really part of our architecture, which is collective learning, which is that you can actually connect IoT devices, millions of them, and you can train a particular model based on those devices, but nobody actually moves the data around. You just use the bare minimum data to train the models.
And when we're talking, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and that really is the key here, because you can't move that much data around. Well, hopefully we'll have more speed and we'll have more bandwidth, but still, it's very inefficient to move too much data.
Right, and when we're talking about this, joined by Evan Crow, co-founder of Ample Fourth. Evan, making decisions.
Thanks, Yonah. I'm glad to be here, and I see you're wearing a costume for this Halloween-themed interview.
Isn't there a danger? I mean,
yes, sir. I know it's not a very scary costume, but this is what I had around the house, so you'll have to forgive me.
I would say unbalanced. Not
right, it might be scary if you stand up.
Yeah,
exactly. I'm gonna sit.
Yeah. Right now, the camera tilted upward is an
so Evan, so for those who haven't seen any of your past interviews,
who might along that spectrum, but when we're talking about these autonomous economic agents that are learning from data sets, does this not give an advantage to the agents that have access to more data? Let's say I am a Google CEO, and I allow my agent access to all of Google's data, but I don't allow any other agents access to Google's data. So my agent will have access to more data, and my knowledge of AI is limited, but I would assume would be smarter and therefore would be better than the other agents. And so for, I send out my agent into this framework, and my agent has an unfair advantage against other less learned agents. Is there a possibility of that?
Of course, there is that possibility. But then what you're saying is that let's change the way the world works, right? And it's not going to be that easy to do. So you have all, we're all humans. We have different needs. We have different intelligences. We have different everything, right? So you're going to have also different privileges. So you're going to always have that, and I don't think we can completely wipe that out. But then the point you were making with your consensus was quite the right one, is that the best we can do is take the lowest level, and we can actually try and align the incentives. So it doesn't matter how clever one of the agents is, it can't actually in any particular way cheat you financially. You still are in control of your own decision. And again, some people would say, okay, use my data and give me a better agent. Some people say, I don't want anybody to use my data to give me better agents. I'm quite happy with my simple life, and I want to keep it that way. I don't really need to have, Netflix telling me, what film to watch. I'll choose my own. So, or you have other side of things that, okay, well, if the application is for free and is giving me ads which are relevant to me, you can take my data. And I'm kind of in the second camp where I'm saying, okay, unless it's something which I really don't want to lose, I don't mind technology kind of giving me a better service for use of data. However, what we're saying is that data then is used for you rather than giving the benefit to this aggregator in the middle. Because at the moment, that's what's happening. You're giving the aggregator this huge advantage, which then I would probably exploit is a very strong word, but they exploit to actually although they want to give you the advantage, they take most of it.
Yeah, I mean, right now, at this point, data is becoming so much more valuable, and there's so much more about us. At the beginning, when Facebook first started, or kind of Google started taking off, it was, I knew what I was giving in. I'm going to give you my data, and you're going to give me a free service, a free social network, a free, a free Android software on my phone. People, and that is something I realized, and something that I'm okay with. But as more data has become available on us, and the models have become so powerful, where the predictive models, they have so much data on who I am, that they're able to build predictive models that are shockingly accurate.
You don't know. Even you don't know.
Exactly. I mean, you could tell us where, they probably know me better than I know myself. They probably have models that could tell what decision I'm going to make better than and if you ask me. I mean, and so at some point, I think there was this shift, kind of like you said, where it's not quite exploit, but they'd accumulated so much.
We're joined by Evan Crow, co-founder of Ample Force.
So much on
Evan, thanks so much for joining.
Volume and the
Thanks, Yonah. I'm glad to be here,
like
and I see you're wearing a costume for this Halloween-themed interview.
Yes, sir. I know it's not a very scary costume, but this is what I had around the house, so you'll have to forgive me.
Right, it might be scary if you stand up.
Exactly. I'm going to sit.
Yeah.
The camera tilted upward. So, Evan, so for those who haven't seen any of your past interviews,
there is this tipping point, right? We've gone beyond it, so we can bring it back into balance. And I think this is what we're proposing. So, for example, there is if you do a little bit of research, you'll see in hospitality there is a big issue with these aggregators controlling the market. So the hoteliers are very dissatisfied because because of the volume they give them and the way they control the market, they can actually control the price, right? From both sides. So the consumer could be thinking that there is a desperate need for hotel rooms, and the hotelier is thinking, well, nobody wants my hotel rooms. So you could kind of creating that disbalance, and that disbalance is only because they are controlling the information in the middle. And for providing a service, yes, and if it's a fair service, then fine, because if it's a fair market, then it's fine. But what has happened is in search of a fairer market with the technology, which we had initially, we're now gone completely the other way. So previously, I was able to see all my prices, which were coming direct from the hotels, and I could make the right choice so people couldn't charge crazy money because it was becoming all balanced. What is now happening is the same thing is happening, but with the aggregator. They're showing what they need to show you, right? They're saying, well, there's this hotel price is in huge demand. If you don't book it right now for twice the price, which you would have paid generally, it's going to go, right? that's what needs to stop. And the way to stop it is to have the ability to connect the consumer and the service provider together without the need for an aggregator.
And so in this new framework, it won't even be just a decentralized aggregator. There won't even be an aggregator. Essentially, the agent, the hotel agent will identify itself to the network as a hotel with this price, and then my agent will be sent across the whole network to find the hotel agent. So there doesn't even need, one doesn't even need to program, a hotel aggregator. It's inherent. Every agent, knows its job and is sent out to do the work.
Yep, that's absolutely it.
So smart idea, my man.
so once it's out there, people will see the actual strength of it, and people will see what this way of thinking is different. And I'm not saying it will apply to everything, and I'm not saying that it will apply to everything day one. But if you think about what we were saying, there is the thousands of websites. There's thousands of people who want to know these websites. Where do you find it? There's this Google sits in the middle, connects them. And initially that the whole objective was not to sell ads. The objective was to just connect. And I think that's what is now changed into is that tipping point you were talking about, which is, it's kind of become detrimental to the whole open economy. So we have a system a framework which is called Open Economic Framework. What it enables you to do is, without the need for this aggregator intermediary, you can have your agents. They can negotiate. They can even negotiate. You don't have to just accept the price, whatever is given. You can negotiate. So, for example, the hotel can say, okay, the demand is not as high, and I'm willing to negotiate X%. And the hotel doesn't have to tell it; it just automatically knows. And the consumer, kind of negotiate with multiple parties. So you have that ability of agents to negotiate with multiple agents and try and get you the best value. So yeah, it's a new way of doing things, and of course it will take its time.
Well, I mean, listen, it sounds really like a wonderful idea, and you seem like a very smart man who knows a lot more than me, so I'm all for it. But the thing that's always, maybe you can enlighten me here, because the thing that's always, I don't know, worried me or confused me was there's so much decentralized software solutions that are being made. This is what you're explaining to me is a way of knocking out Google or the aggregators, the software middlemen. But aren't we essentially connecting to all these decentralized solutions through a very centralized internet? I mean, my ability to connect to this framework still has to go through my ISP and has to go through, just this kind of, these centralized landline, centralized internet connections and infrastructure that are currently in place. So even if we decentralize all the software, aren't we still very, very centralized in terms of the hardware, in terms of connecting to the internet?
My thinking is this, that what has happened is then there was initially this hardware. When I say hardware, I don't mean just technical hardware. I mean technical and others. So for example, Amazon has all these buildings where they do storage, and there is this hardware based services, and I don't feel that they're going to go anywhere yet, like data centers. And
we're joined by Evan Crow, co-founder of Ample4th. Evan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Yonah. I'm glad to be here, and I see you're wearing a costume for this Halloween-themed interview.
Yes, sir. I know it's not a very scary costume, but this is what I had around the house, so you'll have to forgive me.
Right, it might be scary if you stand up.
Exactly. I'm gonna sit.
Yeah.
The camera tilted upward.
Maybe.
So Evan, so for those who haven't seen any of your past interviews, who might
coming. I mean, you can see that happening on blockchain right now. I unfortunately can't foresee to its true extent what would that look like. So, for example, a data center which is owned by everybody. I mean, you could say, what is a company? A company owns a data center. It's actually owned by the shareholders, really. So if it's a public company, the public owns it, right? So that doesn't make any difference. So I think partly we're all doing it for economic incentives. So somebody has to make money somewhere, and the thing which what you're saying is, are we still centralized? Well, not if we have a way of decentralizing asset ownership, and maybe that's also to come. But that would be hampered by the financial regulation. It will be hampered by all the financial because where you have good eggs, you have bad eggs, right? So people will try and cheat. So the money gets involved. Then it becomes quite, well, it goes back into the regulated space.
And if every person kind of gets their own agent, and the agent is individualized or connected to an individual person, can you see a future where voting takes place through these agents? Voting for political systems?
Yeah, that should be, I mean, you don't need agents for that to be, that's the fair answer, because you could do voting on blockchain today and it would be a much fairer voting system. And I think I was reading some tweet by Vitalik the other day. I'm sure if you put all the blockchain industry experts together, they can come up with a voting system probably within a week. And they probably have it already somewhere running. So I think voting for sure. Agents, I don't know if the agents need to do that, because I think it's probably not necessary we don't want to overcomplicate simple solutions. So I think agents would be useful where you don't want to do the whole tedious tasks of looking for the market, searching the market, trying to negotiate with 10,000 things. I mean, and again, don't give you another example of the agent. So you're in your self-drive car. How are you negotiating with the road? How are you seeing the signals? So if you think about self-drive car, if the agent was in your car, agent could be speaking to 10 cars ahead. You don't have to just rely on vision. So you can rely on that communication that, just around the corner, there's a cycle coming. You can't see the cyclist, but you know it's there because the agents are communicating and letting each other know. So, that's the kind of things which we think agent-based systems are pretty good to kind of deliver.
And how about, I mean, when I was reading up on your guys' company and its abilities, I was thinking the electricity grid would be a great solution there, because the so much electricity on the grid is wasted because and especially as we move more towards alternative energies, solar power, wind power. A lot of these things are peaky. They during the day solar panels are going to produce their power, and then at night they're not. And so right now the electrical grid has this issue of both storing during peak time and transporting during off peak time. Could you see a solution where I have solar panels on my roof and I have batteries to store that extra energy in my house? Could you see where my agent could potentially be selling extra energy that my house doesn't need to the grid?
Yeah, and we did a trial proof of concept with Warwick University in the UK. We took they have this whole campus where there's multiple buildings with multiple needs and used for multiple purposes, including parking and everything else. We did a trial with them. We saved roughly all the simulations.
We're joined by Evan Crow, co-founder of Ample Fourth. Evan, thanks so much for joining.
Around 24.
Thanks, Yonah. I'm glad to be here, and I see you're wearing a costume for this Halloween-themed interview.
Yes, sir. I know it's not a very scary costume, but this is what I had around the house, so you'll have to forgive me.
Right, it might be scary if you stand up.
Exactly. I'm gonna sit.
Yeah.
The camera tilted upwards.
Right.
So Evan, so for those who haven't seen any of your past interviews,
and every building has its own objectives, right? So the agent needs to meet those objectives first, and then collaborate and communicate with other buildings to achieve an overall efficiency improvement. So that was quite a cool project, and you can certainly deliver that on agent-based systems.
And so you guys are already delivering on these proof of concepts. You mentioned these crazy numbers of increases in efficiency and savings. What is next? When is launch? What's stopping you guys from already implementing this framework in the real world?
We're in launch now, so it's going to continue for as long as we are, because there's so much to do. There's a lot to do here. And as you can imagine, the scale of this thing is not restricted to a certain vertical. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to take some niche verticals where we think it's easy to deploy such a system. So we have a DDN, which is a decentralized delivery network. So where you have these agents where if you have a car, you can download the agent on your phone. Now you are ready to do, people, pizza, package. So you can do all three of them. So if you really want to go for gig economy, you can get given jobs. You can be optimized for efficiency. So you can pick up some person and drop some person and pick up a package and drop the package and pick up some food and optimize your own journey. So not for the middle aggregator, but for yourself. And on the other side, the consumer can do the same. You can have one app. You can do ride hailing, you can do package delivery, and you can do all of that. So that's our first kind of a more of a commercial product which is going to come out. We also have, so that's one, and then we have now integrate that kind of, because it's all in the mobility space, because you're improving efficiency of people and devices and cars and consumers. And then you have this hospitality one, which is what we talked about a little bit. If you could enable these hoteliers to actually have the ability to communicate with the agents directly and then try and scale that. So that's another product which is probably going to be launched in 3 months, 2 to 3 months. These are the verticals which we think are very interesting. We have a field trial running with Munich in terms of parking, and again, you could. We have a couple of city councils we're working with to improve a smart infrastructure deployment. Because if you think about it, you need a method of connecting this smart infrastructure and then communicating with it. So that's the 3 verticals we're going to come in. And one on a more different note is we talked about collective learning, where multiple agents, multiple data sets can actually learn from each other. We're looking for healthcare where data you can't share too much, where we can actually have a system, we can deploy a system where you can actually train a model, and that model can be owned by all the stakeholders. So rather than being all owned by a corporate, you can have a stake in that model. And the more you train that model,
we're joined by Evan Crow, co-founder of Ample Fourth.
That was actually
Evan, thanks so much for joining.
My next question.
Thanks, Yonah. I'm glad to be here, and I see you're wearing a costume for this Halloween-themed interview.
Yes, sirree. I know it's not a very scary costume, but this is what I had around the house, so you'll have to forgive me.
It's controlling so much.
Right, it might be scary if you stand up.
Isn't all this data public on the
Exactly.
blockchain?
I'm gonna sit.
Yeah. Open camera tilted to see exactly what.
Right.
So Evan, so for those who haven't seen any of past interviews
in all areas of your life?
No, it's. I think what needs to be kind of distinguished here is that you can look at the settlements and you can enable whatever you want to enable. There's no point storing all this data on the blockchain for people to query. What you want is the financial transaction. So with financial transaction settlements on the blockchain comes trust. So your agent will build up trust scores, whereby if people want to interact with your agent, they can interact with comfort that yes, there is trust level there. But you also have a staking mechanism whereby if agents try and cheat you, you have a staking issue. But the point is not to run it in public in terms of what the agent's tasks are, but to settle in public, which is your economic value settlement. So you can see the transactions going through. But you can't see the tasks while they are in progress, and or your personal preferences you can't see.
Right. Now you're based in the UK, and the UK government recently passed a ban on crypto derivatives. Their thinking was that the retail investor wasn't smart enough to figure out these complex financial products, and they were losing money and you yada yada yada. You could go a long way on this, and I don't really want to focus on that so much, but more on this aspect of regulation, because usually when we speak about new, strong, powerful, like game-changing technologies, people get very scared, and we got to make sure it's regulated. We got to make sure that no one's taking advantage of. But it seems like your system that you're building actually it takes away any need for regulation, because the economic incentives are there to make sure that no one does get scammed. It seems like the framework itself is the regulation, where a hotel can't rip you off because it's written in the code. And, an Uber driver won't get paid until he delivers you there because it's written in the code. So do you feel like this technology, doesn't necessarily need regulation by its nature? And B, if it does, do you, or if not, do you feel that with your interactions with the various city councils and different jurisdictions, have you felt like that they want to work with you and they're excited about this, or are they scared about this?
I think it's so my personal opinion is that regulation is there for a purpose, so that, as you said, some more privileged people can't take advantage of more vulnerable people, right? So that's really the purpose of regulation, if you look at it in its core value. What is now happening is that we are over-regulating certain things, and we're trying to handhold every single person, trying to make sure that they don't go and do something silly whereby they lose money. Now, okay, this is a controversial kind of statement, but this is my personal opinion here. The reason why people lose money is because they take risk. And why they take risk is because they have greed. That's a human nature. Now, the more the greed, the more the risk, and the more the money you could lose, right? So if a person's choice is to take that risk, I think we should be allowed to do that. We should be allowed to do that, but not to say that you shouldn't warn people about it. And there has to be a regulation, but as long as there is a fair market, and I think that's the purpose of a regulation, is that there is a fair market. Nobody has an undue disadvantage or advantage over somebody else. And I think, so for that purpose, I agree with regulation, because what regulation does, for example, in futures markets, in stock market, it tries to level the playing field. And then what risk
joined by Evan Crow, co-founder of Ample Fourth.
So if
Evan, thanks so much for
and
joining.
I kind of would.
Thanks, Yonah. I'm glad to be here, and I see you're wearing a costume for this Halloween-themed interview.
Yes, sirree. I know it's not a very scary costume, but this is what I had around the house, so you'll have to forgive me.
Right, it might be scary if you stand up.
Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna sit.
Yeah.
The camera tilted upward.
Right.
So, yeah, Evan, so for those who haven't seen any of your past interviews, who might
Bitcoin, Ethereum, they're still volatile, right? But we know there is less of this, controlling by whales, right? So, having said that, that could be argued as well. But generally, but then the US dollar could be the same, GBP could be the same. The bigger the player, the bigger the kind of manipulation, if you want it. So I think I don't agree with it, but I can see the point of view, because a lot of people did and still keep losing a lot of money. But in crypto, we seem to seem to take it in a stride. So every time a DeFi project loses $10 million, the price of DeFi goes up. So I think in terms of regulation, I am reasonably pro-regulation, but I think it's going too far now. I think it's causing hindrance towards developing different creative ideas, and part of that is because other forces are also controlling regulation, which don't want this to come about.
Well, the beauty of regulation is that it's done by governments which are notoriously slow, and then we have innovation that just zooms right past it and before it could catch up. So Humayun, thank you so much for taking the time to explain to us this really exciting new cutting edge technology that I know I've been frustrated with aggregators. They provided service, but you've highlighted a lot of the issues with them. So it's exciting to get back to that free open market. So I appreciate you taking the time and the amazing work you do. And for all of our viewers at home for Reimagine 2020, I'm Yonah Hochhauser. Thanks for watching.
Thank you, Yonah.